Hello, bro. Hello, bro. Good morning. Good morning, bro. Sáng nay không thấy chú cuốn trắng ấy mọi người nhé. Sáng nay không thấy chú cuốn trắng. Không đi theo thầy. Dạ thầy ạ. Dạ. Thầy bảo vệ sĩ không đi theo thầy. Welcome back. Đi con chân ở dưới chân cho anh em nha. Thầy bảo là cho họ quay. Rồi, tất nhiên có thì cần. Đây để lên phía trước.
Building and officials are talking. It's for a ceasefire and hostage deal to break between Israel and Hamas. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is now saying opportunities have opened up to free the hostages. In what his critics are saying, the Prime Minister is now seeking the release of the hostages before his other military objectives in Gaza. Could the 50 hostages held by terror groups in the Gaza Strip be released soon? Here's what else you need to know.
New opportunities are rising after the ceasefire deal with Iran was established. While meeting officials at a Shin Bet facility in the south of Israel, the Prime Minister said first and foremost to rescue the hostages, and then going on to say to resolve the issue in Gaza and to defeat Hamas.
אני רוצה לבשר לכם שנפתחו, כפי שאתם בוודאי יודעים, נפתחו הרבה הזדמנויות עכשיו, בעקבות הניצחון הזה, הרבה מאוד הזדמנויות. קודם כל לחלץ את החטופים, כמובן שאנחנו נצטרך לפתור גם את עניין עזה, להכריע את החמאס, אבל אני מעריך שאנחנו נשיג את שתי המשימות. אבל מעבר לזה נפתחות אפשרויות אזוריות רחבות, שבחלק מהם, בעצם כמעט בכולם אתם שותפים.
Netanyahu's critics say it's the first time since October 7th the Prime Minister placed the release of the hostages as the government's top priority above the defeat of Hamas. As momentum and pressure continues to grow for a ceasefire and hostage deal, Netanyahu used the word, quote, rescue instead of the word, quote, release while speaking about the hostages. The Hostages Family Forum says, quote, the families of the hostages welcomes the fact that after 20 months, the return of the hostages has finally been designated as the top priority by the Prime Minister. Meanwhile, their statement goes on to say, quote, it is crucial to emphasize that what is needed is release, not rescue. The difference of one word would mean the difference between salvation and loss for the hostages. The families of hostages have long warned and feared that any military action to rescue living hostages could result in their deaths. Netanyahu's comments come after President Trump made remarks a ceasefire deal could come within weeks, and after Trump took to Truth Social to say, quote, "Make the deal in Gaza, get the hostages back." As Israel pushes for the dismantling and disarming of Hamas in the Gaza Strip during negotiations, the terror group continues to push back from recent negotiations, despite officials saying Hamas is weakened, although they still rule parts of the Gaza Strip.
And the Prime Minister, Defense Minister, and IDF Chief of Staff held high-level discussions to consider the next steps in the war in Gaza. The Army indicated that it's fulfilled its missions and awaits new orders to fully conquer Gaza amid a potential ceasefire agreement. It's day 632 of the war in Gaza, and ILTV's Steve Leibowitz has the latest.
A soldier killed in action yesterday in Gaza was laid to rest. 20-year-old Sergeant Yisrael Natan Rosenfeld, age 20, was killed by an explosive device during fighting in northern Gaza. Rosenfeld from Anana served in the Combat Engineering Battalion. He was the 20th soldier killed in fighting since the start of the month. The fallen soldier was from a family of immigrants from London. Prime Minister Netanyahu and Defense Minister Katz and IDF Chief Eyal Zamir held high-level discussions yesterday to evaluate the next steps in Gaza that could include a potential move toward wider military operation if the hostage negotiations fail to result in a breakthrough to end or pause the war in Gaza. Within the IDF, there's an ongoing debate about whether to press forward in Gaza or declare that the war's main objectives were achieved, including the destruction of Hamas military infrastructure and senior commanders, the dismantling of tunnels and weapon systems, and the seizure of over half of the territory. Meanwhile, the IDF has ordered Palestinians to evacuate areas of northern Gaza, expecting intensified fighting with Hamas. Following new evacuation orders, thousands of Palestinians from northern Gaza and Jabalia are moving toward the Sheikh Radwan area. The army has intensified bombardments in the area with reports of civilians being killed near Mawasi. The military escalation comes as Arab mediators from Egypt and Qatar, backed by the U.S., are continuing efforts to reach another ceasefire for hostage deal. The agreement could secure the release of the remaining Israeli hostages, living and dead, and potentially bring an end to the war in Gaza.
Thank you, Steve, for that report. And joining us now is Joe Truzman, a senior researcher, analyst, and editor at FDDS's Long War Journal. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Now, we heard these brand new comments from Netanyahu overnight, specifically talking about rescuing the hostages. Tell me what you think this means. And do you think he's being realistic? Could these hostages potentially be rescued?
Right. There's always the potential for hostages to be rescued. I think, though, over the last few months, at least since earlier this year when the ceasefire collapsed, we've observed the IDF rescue, at least recover the bodies of hostages. However, we haven't seen any of them rescued alive. And I think that's paramount here is to rescue these hostages alive, at least the ones that are still in Gaza. So I think this is important. I'm not sure if it's going to happen that with the current strategy that the IDF has, that the IDF is employing. It may have reached its limits already. So I think a ceasefire may be the best option here for Israel to get at least the live hostages back, and of course, recover the bodies of the other hostages.
But is that ceasefire deal realistic, in your opinion? Do you feel like this momentum that everyone keeps talking about from the Iran and Israel ceasefire, that momentum could be now shifted to this part of the region, and a ceasefire and a hostage deal could be reached in the near future?
I mean, I think the problem here is that there are certain obstacles that have impeded a ceasefire deal for many months now. And I think those obstacles is that, specifically, one of the obstacles is that whether Hamas stays in power or not, all right? I think this is obviously something that Israel does not want. And conversely, Hamas wants to stay in power. But So these are very difficult questions that need to be answered. And I think both sides, Hamas and Israel, will have to give some leeway here with their demands if they want a ceasefire. But I think time is against both Hamas and Israel right now, considering everything, all the factors that are involved here. So I think it is possible, but we have to be careful here. We've seen ceasefire deals almost be achieved in the last more than a year and a half, but obviously we know only a couple of them have lasted for so long. So we'll have to wait and see.
I know, and we have to remember the toll it takes on these families that have been waiting almost 2 years at this point to get their loved ones back. These conversations, of officials saying there's optimism and then things don't come to fruition. It's a painful game that they're stuck in, and it's a very unfair system that they have to deal with. Tell me why you think there's so much pressure from President Donald Trump at this point in time to get a deal reached.
Right. As you said, it's almost been 2 years of war. I think there are also other factors, specifically Israel normalizing relations, ties with countries in the region. And I think President Trump wants that to advance. And what's impeding that is the war in Gaza. All right. I think that's why we're starting to see more pressure on Israel here to get a ceasefire deal, as we saw with the recent post by President Trump. So I think it has a lot to do with the advancing normalization with countries in the region.
Right, and we just heard in an interview yesterday from President Donald Trump that there could be even more countries that are interested in joining the Abraham Accords. Tell me, do you think Israel has accomplished their war objectives inside of Gaza?
I think they've gone much farther than I expected. I've started tracking this war, obviously, since more than a year and a half ago. And to be quite honest, I didn't expect the successes that they've had so far. Yahya Sinwar's dead. Many of his lieutenants are dead. Obviously, his brother's been eliminated recently. So Hamas is severely degraded. Severely, all right. They're still operating, but they aren't what they were pre-October 7th, and that's I think that's a success for the Israelis, to be quite honest with you. Whether Hamas stays in power after this is over, that's another question. And this may be a sacrifice that Israel has to make to get the hostages back. That is, of course, to leave Hamas in power, unfortunately, in the Gaza Strip.
Right, and we know that Israel is saying they're still hitting specific infrastructure sites inside of Gaza as well. And we actually know just from yesterday, I believe, that the IDF actually managed to eliminate one of the founders of Hamas. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that's one of the reports that actually came in, as they are still continuing to target very specific people inside of the Gaza Strip. Any take on that? I know we're a little bit short on time, but quick take.
Right. So, yeah, listen, Israel's been doing a great job degrading Hamas's infrastructure, eliminating personnel, as you mentioned. So this is an important achievement. So Hamas is beat. Now, however, they're not completely down. Nevertheless, I think the IDF's current strategy has hit its limit. So now Israel has to decide, do we want a ceasefire or do we want to keep going?
Thank you so much, Joe, for joining us in this conversation. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And there are reports in the Arabic media speculating that there could soon be a meeting held between Prime Minister Netanyahu and the new Syrian leader, with the goal of normalizing relations between countries at war since Israel's creation. Here's more with ILTV's Steve Leibowitz.
Jerusalem and Damascus have both confirmed ongoing indirect contacts with U.S. backing. There are reports of a possible meeting between Prime Minister Netanyahu and Syrian leader al-Shara. After a positive meeting with President Trump last month and the U.S. lifting of sanctions, Damascus is reportedly pushing for a potential Israel-Syria agreement. The potential deal envisions IDF withdrawal from the Syrian Golan occupied after al-Shara ousted.
As we wait here for President Trump at the White House to speak, a House divided over who leaked the low-confidence preliminary assessment of Iran's nuclear facilities.
But history shows almost all leaks come out of the executive branch.
The low confidence preliminary assessment that was leaked, sadly and dangerously, probably from this body.
Okay, so let's bring in Fox News chief political analyst Britt Hume. Britt, good to see you. Happy Friday to you. A lot of finger pointing going on in Washington, which is pretty par for the norm. The president blames Democrats for this leak as the White House really wages this war on the leaker, and they want to prosecute this leaker as quickly as possible.
Are you willing to get involved militarily to defend Taiwan if it comes to that?
We'll ever know who the leaker is, because we're still waiting.
The United States is building up its military presence in the region and is practicing how to sink Chinese ships.
And there have been leakers found, and a lot more leakers.
We're not going to come to an agreement over Taiwan.
Wait for the unification to be achieved. Peacefully, I hope. Non-peacefully, I dread.
But why are these two superpowers so fixated on Taiwan? What's in it for China and the US? And how do people in Taiwan feel about it? It's Taiwan's location that makes it a geopolitical flashpoint. Taiwan has 23 million inhabitants, and its main island lies only 130 kilometers away from China's mainland. These tiny islands right off the coast are also under Taiwanese control. And Chinese military drills around the whole of Taiwan are getting bigger and more frequent. In recent videos released by China's People's Liberation Army, Beijing has threatened to encircle the island. It sees Taiwan as part of its territory and says it's ready to use force if necessary to get it back. We'll talk more about the history and Taiwan's status later. For now, you need to know that in the late 1940s, there was a civil war in China between communists and nationalists. The communists won and took control of mainland China. And the nationalists fled to Taiwan. That laid the groundwork for today's tensions. The US has an ambiguous policy towards Taiwan. Since the late 1970s, it's recognized communist Beijing as the only legitimate government of China. But it has informal ties with Taiwan and is seen as the island's protector. Okay, let's go back to the map to understand why the US and China can't quit Taiwan. In some ways, Taiwan's strategic importance is about 3 choke points around the island. To the west, there's the Taiwan Strait. It's a key trade route for both Beijing and Taiwan, and also for everybody else. Almost all the world's biggest container ships pass through here. To the north, the Miyako Strait. It runs between Taiwan and these Japanese islands. And in the south, the Bashi Strait. It runs between Taiwan and the Philippines. For China, these 2 straits on either side of Taiwan are key strategic gateways to the Pacific Ocean.
Taiwan is in the middle of the Chinese coastline, which is very important.
This is Victor Gao. He's a former Chinese diplomat and vice president of the Center for China and Globalization, a Beijing think tank some say is close to the Chinese Communist Party.
Taiwan Island faces the Pacific directly, and if Taiwan is occupied by a foreign country, for example, it interrupts the continuity.
Israel had warned people to evacuate areas in North Gaza, Gaza City and Deir Bala. They were urged to head south, but 80% of the strip is now an Israeli militarized zone or under evacuation orders. At least 20 people were killed this afternoon in an Israeli strike on the beachfront Al-Baka cafe in Gaza City. And a warning, this report from Porrick O'Brien does contain some very distressing details.
This was filmed from the famous Al-Baka cafe on the beachfront in Gaza City a few weeks ago by the photographer Ismail Abu Khattab. The cafe was renowned as a place of work and refuge for artists and journalists. Today at around lunchtime, it was hit by an Israeli missile. Ishmael was killed along with at least 20 others. Abu Abdullah was there when the strike took place.
It was a missile from an F-16, a military aircraft, not a drone or a bomb or a shell from a boat. The F-16 shook the place. It struck this place, as you can see, pools of blood, piles of martyrs. I mean, if you had seen the scene from the beginning, there were piles of bodies.
We asked the IDF today who they were targeting and are still awaiting a response. The attack came after Israel carried out a wave of airstrikes across the Strip overnight and into today. The IDF had warned of a major offensive over the weekend, triggering another cycle of mass displacement. With Donald Trump pressuring Netanyahu for a ceasefire and at the same time calling for his corruption trial to be dropped, it's not clear whether this is part of a final military push before a pause in the violence or just another gear shift in its relentless acceleration.
Well, when Health Secretary Wes Streeting was asked about Bob Villan yesterday, he condemned them, but he also said that Israel needed to get its house in order with regard to the West Bank. He was referring to an upsurge in violence where settlers have stepped up their attacks on Palestinian towns in the occupied territories. There are many such examples, and our chief correspondent, Alex Thompson, went to see one town, the site of horrific violence already this week.
Mere location, the difference between living and dying. These houses located nearest to the neighbouring illegal Israeli settlements, and here, near, means vulnerable. Wednesday night, massed groups of Israeli settlers invade Kafir Malik, burning cars, trying to burn down houses. Israeli soldiers look on, firing warning shots vertically, then levelling their weapons, they advance at the Palestinians, not the settlers. For decades across the West Bank, Israeli settlers have been stealing Palestinian land. Now, though, emboldened by Israel's wars and with support from far-right government ministers, they appear to feel they can act with impunity. And at the first house they got to in Kafir Malik, the car remains burned out, windows smashed. Inside, evidence of an attempt to set fire to the house. Palestinian villagers here say 17 people were in at the time, 11 were children. Cars burned out in several surrounding streets. Bullet cases where Israeli soldiers opened fire on Wednesday. One village elder said he saw the settlers coming in a 30-car convoy.
The communists are just crazy. They want to kill everybody. If they can kill the kids before the old man, they will do it. That's what they're doing. And the Israeli government is not doing nothing.